Introduce myself. I'm Jay Vogt. I'm the former State Historic Preservation Officer and former Director of the South Dakota State Historical Society. This is only the second time I've been in the Cultural Heritage Center since my retirement on December 8th. It's nice to be back, but temporarily. It's also good to be out and about, and thank you to those of you who are in the room. And I extend a special welcome to my good friend, Milt Oler King and Frank Allen for being here. It wouldn't be the same without you here. And welcome to everybody on Zoom. I'm going to talk about the book, Picturing the Past, South Dakota's Historic Places, first published in hardcover in 2006, and it was reprinted in softcover in this past year. I'm going to talk about the book, what it includes, the contributors, and the value of historic preservation. Despite the book being largely about photographs, I'm not doing a PowerPoint tonight. Instead, you get to see this old guy's mug. And in order to see the photographs, you need to purchase the book. The book is $29.95 plus tax, making it $32.35 if you purchase it here at the Heritage Store. And it's also available online at history.sd.gov, and either click on Publishing tab or the Shop tab. In order to understand how this book came into existence and my role in the project, I need to provide you with some context. History people love context. I joined the staff of the State Historical Society in the summer of 1987 as the executive assistant to the director, who was J.R. Fishburne at the time. I was directed to get the society's budget under control, that's the words, under control, by James Hansen, who was secretary of the Department of Education and Cultural Affairs, and to handle special projects. The budget part was largely telling the office directors to stay within the respected budgets. Don't spend money you don't have. And trying to move funds around to balance the budget. The operative word there being trying. Shortly after moving into the Cultural Heritage Center in 1989, I was asked to take on a special project of raising funds for the proposed primary exhibit, the South Dakota Experience. The Mickelson administration was invested in the center, and First Lady Linda Mickelson was active in the fundraising effort. That largely remained my focus until 1994. That year, the economy took a dive, state government revenues were down, and Governor William J. Janklow got reelected to his third term as governor. His message to state agencies was to come up with a plan to cut 10% of your budget and reduce the staff. Well, in the meantime, J.R. Fishburne had resigned to become president of Stratford Hall, the ancestral home of Richard Henry Lee of Declaration of Independence fame in Virginia, and former legislator Mary Eadlin was appointed his successor. J.R. Fishburne, like me, held the position of both director and State Historic Preservation Officer, or SHPO. Sorry. Okay. I'll dial back a little bit. J.R. Fishburne had resigned to become president of Stratford Hall, the ancestral home of Robert Henry Lee in Virginia, and former legislator Mary Eadlin was appointed his successor. J.R. Fishburne, like me, held both the position of director and State Historic Preservation Officer, or SHPO. Director Eadlin did not want to assume the historic preservation responsibilities, and the then director of the Office of Historic Preservation was appointed the State Historic Preservation Officer. However, within a couple of months, he resigned to take another position in another state. During budget cutting times, it is not good to have vacant positions. We put together a plan, and Director Eadlin presented it to the department secretary and the governor. I helped put together the plan, and I knew, unfortunately, It took away most of the budgetary gains we had made during the Nicholson administration. After the meeting, Director Edlin returned to the center and stopped by my office, telling me to come to her office. I thought, holy crap, I'm being let go. I walked into her office and she said, shut the door and sit down. I knew I was being let go. She said, they did not accept our plan. Your position is going away, and you're going to be the new State Historic Preservation Officer. My response was, what? I don't know a thing about historic preservation. Now, at that point in my career, I was hoping to create an education program for the society. Historic preservation was never a career path I even considered pursuing. Director Edlin said, Janklow trusts you and wants you in that position. I had known the governor for my 8 years working in the office next door with Alice Kundert in the Secretary of State's office, which corresponded with his first 2 terms as governor. And, get ready for it, and he wants you to move the office from Vermilion to the Cultural Heritage Center. Again, holy crap. I know little about historic preservation, and I was expected to perform what I knew was going to be a highly unpopular assignment. My appointment as State Historic Preservation Officer was extremely unpopular with the preservation staff and the preservation community in South Dakota. I was seen as highly suspect by the national preservation players. For some reason, and I still don't know, I was seen as anti-historic preservation. To illustrate the anger at my appointment, the entire staff resigned. They stayed on just long enough to basically pack up the office. We got inmates from the prison in Springfield to load it all up on a semi and bring it to Pierre. And we got inmates from Pierre to unload it in our building. I think they thought that by quitting in mass, the decision to move the office would be reversed. It was not. They underestimated Governor Bill Janklow. At the year-end meeting of the Society's Board of Trustees, which also serves as the state review board under the National Historic Preservation Act, preservationists packed the meeting to express their displeasure. But more importantly, they wanted to make sure I presented what needed to be done at the end of the year. At my first National Conference of State Historic Preservation Officers annual meeting in Washington, D.C., I worked the group introducing myself and making sure people could see that I did not have horns or a tail. Most people were pleasant. We all served at the pleasure of our governor, so there was a certain level of come and go in the organization. But most of the people were friends of my immediate predecessor. Nevertheless, I remember meeting my counterpart from Pennsylvania. And after I introduced myself, she said, so you're the one. It wasn't all bad. The Western director of the National Conference of the National Trust of Historic Preservation was extremely supportive and sent a couple staff people to help me set up and handle basic business. The assistant director of the National Conference of State Historic Preservation Officers took me under her wing and provided me with support and connected me to key people for advice and assistance. Although state government was not hiring, it was in a hiring freeze, I was allowed to hire 5 employees. And I believe for at least 1 month, those are the only positions open in state government. The State Bureau of Administration helped us to reconfigure the administrative offices to fit in the Historic Preservation Office. Eventually, we got back to some kind of normalcy, as we're dealing with normalcy here. And I was learning a lot. And I found out I loved it. During the move, we uncovered 2 manuscripts, one on early architecture in the state, including American Indian construction, and the other on mining and milling in the Black Hills. In consultation with Nancy Tystedt-Koppel, Director of Research and Publishing and the new South Dakota Historical Society Press, we decided to have the manuscripts reworked and start a historic preservation book series. Building South Dakota came out first in 1997 on architecture, followed a few years later by Chasing the Glitter. These books were well received as important bodies of scholarship. As a side note here, neither of these books sold as well as Picturing the Past did. Just saying. It was a start. Both these books were slightly oversized, and if we continued with the same format, maybe a sites book, or for lack of a better word, a picture book, would be appropriate. Now, let me warn you, the following description is not how to put together a book. Thank goodness, Picturing the Past was a team effort with the historic preservation staff. Early on, we decided to select iconic, but not the typical historic properties for the book. Hence, no picture of Mount Rushmore or the Corn Palace appears in the book. We also decided we wanted to have black and white photographs to keep a historic feel. Nancy Copel and her team advised us to select far more properties to be photographed than we could possibly need or use. We also wanted a variety of property types: commercial properties, homes, public buildings, structures, and landscapes, including detail on those buildings or construction details. Nearly all the properties were listed in the National Register of Historic Places, and we tried to cover the entire state. I insisted that none of the photographs be used before the book was published. After a national search, we found Scott Myers as a photographer. He was fantastic and a pleasure with which to work. He was young and hungry. And at the start of the project, he was recently married, and he and his wife spent their honeymoon camping around South Dakota to take photographs for the book. He would wait for the best possible night and sky for the photos. He made several trips to South Dakota to take photos. Today, he goes by Scott Patrick Myers, and he's a successful fine art wedding and portrait photographer in Columbia, Missouri. Most of the properties we had photographed were listed in the National Register of Historic Places. Now, the National Register is the official list of the nation's historic places worthy of preservation. Typically, buildings, objects, or structures are at least 50 years old or older, maintain their integrity, meaning they still have their character-defining features and look like they did originally, and sustain historical significance related to people, events, association with craftsmanship, architecture, and engineering, or likely to provide additional information. This last category is usually reserved for archaeological sites. Okay, next step, words. Of course, we needed more than just photographs. We needed text. It was a book after all. We needed something to tie it all together, and it was decided we needed some insightful copy to give a discussion of historic preservation and give meaning and context to the photographs. Normally, the manuscript comes first, and the photos and illustrations follow. Now, who was going to do all this writing? And I think more importantly to the staff, and be subject to the potential ruthless research and publishing editing. Everyone needs a good editor. However, the research and publishing team was a bit intimidating. So the staff turned en masse and looked at me. I did feel a kind of personal obligation to the project, but by this time, I was also director of the State Historical Society. I agreed only if Stephen Rogers, who was one of my very first hires in the Historic Preservation Office and was now the director of it, only if Steve also agreed to contribute to the book. He did, and I did. Believe me, it is easier to agree to write a book than to do it. Together with the staff, we decided what themes to cover in the book, and we ended up with 7 chapters, or the lack of a sexier word, essays, and then not much happened. In fairness to us, we were busy, but we needed someone to crack the whip. So we were assigned an outside editor to keep us on schedule and to do the first edit and blend Stephen's and my styles and voices. Stephen and I would divide up who was writing what. We would draft a chapter and share it with each other, offer comments and suggestions, and rewrite it before turning it over to the editor, and then rewriting it again after it came back from the editor. Believe me, a good editor can make you sound so much smarter than you are. And a good editor still uses your words to convey the points you're trying to make and make them clearer. It's not necessarily a painless process, but it gets the job done. In addition to my essays, and mine tended to be the shorter ones, I wrote the acknowledgement and the introduction. And for this edition, I wrote the afterword. Stephen and Matthew Reitzel, who was an intern at the time, and who's now a manuscript curator for the State Historical Society in the State Archives, and the staff wrote the captions for the photographs. I got the better deal on that decision. Stephen eventually left the office to work for the National Park Service. He is currently the Section 106 coordinator for the National Park Service in regions 3, 4, and 5, which includes South Dakota. And he works out of the Omaha office. He occasionally would show up in the office. He and his wife, Michelle, who also had worked for us, now have 2 adult boys who were born in Pierre. History is the account of things said and done in the past. All of us have a history, an account of where we come from and how we got to be who we are. I probably say that phrase in nearly every talk I give. It, or something very similar, also appears in Picturing the Past. When I was director of the State Historical Society, I would usually make a pitch to become a member of the State Historical Society. And it's a revenue stream for the society. So feel pitched if you're not a member. And tonight I will add that to that and suggest you buy the book, Picturing the Past, or any other South Dakota Historical Society books. People are the focus of history. But because human life is marked by brevity, a large part of what we understand about the past comes to us in the forms of material records, personal papers, museum artifacts, and historic buildings. These physical remnants are what I like to call the stuff of history that allow us to verify the past by seeing and touching the creations of people who lived before our time. Now, I lied to you earlier. I am going to show a few photographs from the book. This is the cover, and the building is the Harding School in Corson County, built in 1931, and is a typical rural school in our state. Isn't the sky magnificent in this photo? What? Oh, yeah. Okay. It has not changed. Okay. Chapter 1, the open window to our past, provides the context about why historic preservation is important. The photo on the left is part of the Queen Bee Mill, constructed in 1879 in Minnehaha County, near the Sioux Falls. The other photograph is the Hollins Grist Mill, erected in 1884 by Henry Hollins in Grant County. Chapter 2 is sketching the preservationist vision. Historic preservationists see buildings and structures differently. What was its past use, and how can it be used today? Typically, preservationists do not see a dilapidated building, but instead see an opportunity. On the left of this page, we see a photograph of the Roscoe Public Library, built by the spouses of the Priscilla Club in the 1930s in Edmonds County. The other photo is a portion of Fort Meade in Meade County, built as a military fort where the Star-Spangled Banner was believed to be inspired to be our national anthem and was played every night prior to it becoming the national anthem. Today, it is the home of the Veterans Administration Black Hills Healthcare System. Chapter 3 focuses on just because it's old, does it make worth saving? Old buildings are not inherently historic, nor are all historic buildings necessarily old. However, to preservationists, old is not a bad word. The photo on the left here is of the old Catholic Church Cemetery in Yankton County. The other photograph is of the Meridian Bridge at Yankton. I consider this bridge my first major historic preservation save. The Federal Highway Administration, the Nebraska Department of Roads, and the South Dakota Department of Transportation wanted to tear it down as being unsafe. They also made a case that it contained lead paint, but the plan was to just drop the bridge in the river and then remove it. So I'm just thinking lead paint and all that kind of stuff didn't make a difference. The city of Yankton did not care because they were getting a new bridge. However, my counterpart in Nebraska, Robert Puschendorf, and I teamed up to try to save the bridge with community members of Yankton. Bob was a great mentor for me. Opening in 1924, the Meridian Bridge completed the Meridian Highway, or the Pan-American Highway, which ran from Canada to Mexico. The bridge was built with a double deck and a vertical lift for boats for travel under the bridge. Instead of the typical bridge, the road being this way, the bridge was like, the road was like this, one direction this way, one direction this way. And it was a vertical lift bridge, which meant instead of opening like this, it lifted straight up. So it's a very unique and special bridge in South Dakota. The city eventually bowed to pressure and agreed to own the bridge. And today it is a highly popular biking and walking path. Contains lots of love attached to the bridge and is an area for art activities and special event photographs. I doubt if you could find very many people in Yankton today who would say it was not worth saving that bridge. Elizabeth and I generally walk the bridge whenever we are in Yankton. Chapter 4 is about new life for old buildings. Just because a building started out with one purpose does not mean it cannot be used for another. This is the stock on the left is the Stock Growers Bank building in Stanley County, built in 1903 as a bank. Today it is used for offices. It is the iconic building of Fort Pier. The other building photo is of the DC Booth Fish Hatchery in Lawrence County. Built originally as a federal fish hatchery, today the 1898 facility is a museum and the National Archives for the Federal Fish Hatcheries. Chapter 5 addresses taking the measure of craftsmanship. The Onion Dome House, or the Lenahan House in Douglas County, is a fine example of the Queen Anne style with its wraparound porch, irregular roof line, multiple siding materials, and most notably, the onion-shaped dome. It is believed to be the only house in South Dakota with an onion-shaped dome. Other buildings have it, but not this is the only home. This house was significantly damaged when a tornado went through town, and it received a Deadwood grant for its restoration in recent years. The other house is the 1921 Banton House in Yankton County, and it is a wonderful example of a bungalow using rubble for the construction. The property's outbuildings are all built in the same style. I love that house. Chapter 6 is identity, pride, and public buildings. This essay describes public buildings and how they can inspire public pride. Communities erect public buildings in response to community needs, to serve the public interest, and to provide a place to conduct civic affairs. Historically, a public building is one of the most impressive in town. Rehabilitation or restoration can easily change an eyesore into a point of civic pride. We all recognize the state capitol, built in 1910 at a cost of $1 million. It was remodeled in the 1930s to shore it up and to provide additional office space. They took hallways and made offices out of parts of them. But it was restored to its original appearance in the 1980s at a cost of $3.1 million. I was working in the Capitol during its restoration, and I vividly recall the great excitement when they removed one of these temporary walls and a previously unknown stencil pattern was discovered. The other photo is of the Battle Mountain Sanitarium in Fall River County. It is a more recent historic preservation save with the efforts of the local community, veterans groups, and our congressional delegation. The Veterans Administration wanted to shutter the building and the entire campus, but it has reversed its decision. The Battle Mountain Sanitarium is a National Historic Landmark, the highest designation a building or a property can receive in the United States, because it was the first veterans hospital in the country, and it was completed in 1907. Prior to its construction, the federal government only built veterans retirement homes. The idea was that the hospital would exist to handle short stays instead of long-term care. Chapter 7 discusses retaining a sense of place. Each of us identifies with place. The place where we live, where we work, where we belong, where our people come from, and where our stories unfold. The buffalo is taken in the Badlands National Park, which was created in 1978 in Pennington County. The church is the St. Charles Church, or the St. Francis Mission in Todd County. This Romanesque revival church serves as a center for educational and spiritual growth on the Rosebud Sioux Reservation. As part of Ulysses S. Grant's peace policy, various Indian tribes were assigned to specific religious denominations to place emphasis on Christianity, education, and industry. Picturing the Past is primarily a coffee table book because of its rich images by Scott Myers. It is not known for its scholarship. However, it contains thoughtful discussions of various themes in historic preservation. The essays are intended to make the reader consider the value of historic preservation. It is not a how-to book, it is more philosophical. Picturing the Past is the third in a series of historic preservation publications by the South Dakota Historical Society Press. Building South Dakota by David Erpstead and David Wood. Chasing the Glitter by Richmond Clow. Picturing the Past. The South Dakota Capitol by Marshall Damgard. County Capitals by Judge Arthur Rush. And Early Churches in South Dakota by Robert Sebesta. I hope you take a look at these books and consider adding them to your personal library. Remember, history is the account of things said and done in the past. All of us have a history, an account of where we come from and how we got to be who we are. This book includes the most modest of dwellings to the grandest of homes. From ruins to majestic landscapes and parks, ghost towns to thriving commercial districts, and churches and cemeteries to memorials. Historic properties endure because men and women of all walks of life find a connection between the physical reminders of our past and our communities that take us into the future. Thank you for your time and attention, and I am available for any questions. Does anybody have any questions? You can start with the ones in the room here, and if you are online and have a question, you can put it in the chat box and we will handle them as they come in. Any questions?
Jay, I'm not a Christian, but
no.
Can you tell that deal right up there? Did we get that? Is it still out there?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, but do you remember when we lent it to somebody and went clear to England?
Mm-hmm. And then also when another time to Paris.
How long was it gone?
Oh, I suppose about a month or so each time, because it just takes a while to get an exhibit put
I
together.
remember Bill Stevens talked about it, and he was the head of the Lewis and Clark deal. Oh man, we went to a lot of meetings and went to a lot of places for that. But you know, Jay, I'm not trying to be hard, but anyway, we went all over where Lewis and Clark had been years ago, and we got to see some of that stuff that's still there to this day. And it's the only living thing left out of the Lewis and Clark expedition that is like it was before. They put a big glass cover over that thing so tourists couldn't scratch it no more. And oh, we was right there. I could have reached out and I was that close to it.
Milt was saying how he asked about the horse effigy and whether it was on display. And then he was talking about various different locations for the Lewis and Clark expedition that people have seen that still exist in South Dakota too. So any other questions? Mary?
What's your next book?
It's easier to say you're going to write a book than actually. I have none in the works right now. Liz?
Are there any historic places around the state that you haven't been to yet that are still on your list?
Well, you know what? I really want to go and see a lot of the communities in South Dakota. Before I retired, it was always like, okay, we got to get to Sioux Falls, we got to get to Rapid City, we got to get to Aberdeen, wherever we're going. So you just kind of zip across the state and just don't stop in these small towns and take a peek. And that's why I'd like to do some more of that while we're traveling in the state. My historic places outside the state, I want to go see presidential sites as much as I can.
So why don't you tell us a few of your favorite spots that people might not be familiar with?
Oh, Dorinda. I have to think now. There's a lot of great places in South Dakota. And I've seen a lot of places. You know, I went to the book and was looking at all the photos and I go, I think I've been to almost every place in the book. And I just think it's thrilling. I think working in historic preservation, you tend to go out throughout the state and look at different places. And I think even in your own backyard, there are some great places to see. And I think you should take advantage of that. So I'm not gonna highlight any one or two. How's that sound? Frank?
Yeah, I think you dodged Liz's question, and I'm gonna put you on the spot. And which place would you like to go to in South Dakota?
Oh.
Name the small town or name the place. If somebody said you've got to go somewhere tomorrow, what would you say?
I think of someplace close. When we first moved here, the interesting thing was everybody talked about Hayes. West to South Pier was Hayes, go to see Hayes. And so we went out to Hayes, we were greatly disappointed in Hayes. But it's a wonderful, I mean, it's wonderful to see all these little communities, and a lot more like that. Oh, and then on Monday, we're going to Vivian to go to sit into my South. I'm not Norwegian, my wife is Norwegian, but I've grown to love Norwegian too. So there are, and they, I mean, this little town has this huge sit in my festival. So I mean, that's exciting thing that go on.
Don't get run over by the parade though.
Yeah.
Lemon, we talked about, Jay.
Pardon me?
Lemon, we've talked about.
Yeah, I talked about going to Lemon. We've been through Lemon once before with our kids, and that was disaster. But so we want to go sometimes when we have some time for ourselves there. One time we pulled off the road at Forestburg. My grandparents had a farm near Forestburg, and we went into Forestburg, and again we were kind of disappointed in what was left in Forestburg. But again, it's all small towns have their thing. And
Alpena.
yeah, oh yeah. My grandparents then retired to Alpena, and they had the magnificent house in town, and it was if we would have the money, we'd have moved it to Pierre, but we were poor and newlyweds at the time, so. Okay.
Jay, you did you did a great job of telling how you went around through the process of putting together this amazing book. I just wondered if you were going to have to do it again starting today, or do that book starting now rather than at the beginning of your sojourn. Would you do anything differently, or would you add different things, or something that you wish you would had put in there and you missed?
I don't really think we talked a lot about the ethic of historic preservation, how certain communities have more of a historic preservation ethic, and that's something we really need to nurture throughout the state for people to understand and appreciate. Historic preservation's an important part. The cheapest building is the one that already exists, and so I really believe that. And my other comment that I made earlier was that preservationists usually don't see dilapidated buildings; they see an opportunity, and it's really kind of fun. I went to Deadwood one time, and what's the name of that hotel now? But Kevin Kuchenbecker, who's the historic preservation officer in Deadwood, took me on a tour of this building downtown that was condemned. And we walked in the front door, and we could go up the steps to the second floor. But at the second floor, you had to get out, crawl out the window, and go up the fire escape to get into the third floor. And of course, you had to be careful about walking because all this pigeon stuff was all over the floor. So it's kind of slippery. That building never got torn down, and the city forced the developers to restore it. And now it's a first-class hotel in downtown Deadwood. So it was scary inside. So, and I guess those steps I took to the second floor collapsed the next week. And then I was also at one time in the Lead Opera House. And we were up on the balcony and looking around and all that kind of stuff and everything. And then the next week the balcony was declared unsafe and nobody should go up there. So I've done that many a time. And I'm sure Liz has done some of that same type of stuff. You show up at some place and go walk around and find out probably shouldn't have done that. So anyway, it's fun. Milt.
Jay, could I ask Sue Burkhardt if she remembers, I was a janitor in Washington grade school. And Sue, did we spend a lot of time together, right?
We did. I remember it very well. You were an amazing person to have in the school system. We loved you dearly.
I was just the one, but Sue, I can remember we had, and you was there, oh my gosh, many times. Can you remember who was all principals?
Now that's not fair.
But we're not going to put her on the spot. No. Any other questions?
Well,
yes.
Anyway, it was so good to hear from you, Sue. We've been
okay.
So it's two. Number one, I want to know which is your favorite picture, and this one is mine, but
the ruins at the Montec.
yeah, how did you pick this one? And I don't know, if I go there, can you go inside, or is it just this? Where is it kind of?
It's at the Sioux Falls in Sioux Falls, and the ruins are there, and I think they're fenced off so you can't go inside, but you can see the ruins from the exterior. And the same, I think, with the reconstruction of the actual mill building that they have there. But I love the Sioux Falls.
You like this?
It's what we need.
It says it's 7 stories.
Pardon me?
It's 7-story building.
It was at one time. It doesn't exist in that anymore.
And like it's dried up now or something, right?
Well, the river's still there and the falls are still there. It's just that it's a little.
I'm gonna have to go just to see what it looks like for real.
Yeah.
Okay, which one is your favorite picture?
Well, believe it or not, one of my favorite pictures is the Appleby Atlas elevator. It's a dilapidated building. It's on page 30. It's a remnant of South Dakota was passed.
That?
Yes. I just think it's just so, it's so classic, and it's so important in South Dakota's history, and those are all disappearing. They're all and that might even be there anymore, as far as I know, so. Again, we see opportunities, we don't see.
That's a big opportunity.
To tell a story, back when I was in college in Sioux Falls, they opened up the Queen Bee Mill ruins for a Shakespeare in the Park performance, which was awesome. They had the performers just in the middle of the ruined building doing their thing.
Liz Omley was saying that when she was in college, she went to Augustana College also, that at one year they opened up the ruins to do Shakespeare in the Park or whatever it was called, inside the ruins there. Yeah, I remember that. That'd be cool. I never saw it, but it'd be neat to go see.
Say, one quick comment. At the start of your deal, you showed a picture of a one-room schoolhouse back in the old days. And how many people in here went to a one-room school when they was kids?
Milt wants to know if you went to a one-room school. Mary Giddings is raising her hand.
Well, I did. I went from grade 1 through there wasn't no kindergarten back in them days, of course, you know, but I did. I went to 1 through 8th grade in that school. It was a half a mile from our house.
Yeah.
And I remember, oh man, Jay, that was a long time.
I feel sorry for your teacher.
That was back in Sanborn County, is where it was at. I remember like it was yesterday. Yeah.
Frank.
You know, since he's talking the one-room schools, and my mom also taught at Washington, when she started out, she taught country school. And were you involved with that? It was the one where they came over from Norway and took it apart piece by piece and put it in took it to Norway. It was the Norwegian diaspora. They have a federal grounds. It's kind of like a Williamsburg or something. But that very school from down around Gerald County or Sanborn, are you aware of that?
No, I was not. aware
Okay,
of that.
because I know South Dakota Magazine and stuff did it, but the Norwegians came over and piece by piece took it over there. And of course, it's done up real nice. I have a friend that lives in Sweden, but he went to see it. But I know I told my mom, she said, yeah, and they wanted papers and everything. She said, you know, I might have some papers from over, some of my papers. Right. And I said, well, I wonder if they'd ever find that false bottom drawer you had in the desk for your bottle. But she, of course, then she was younger than some of the students like was back then.
Well, and Frank was saying how his mother taught at a one-room schoolhouse, and then he said how the Norwegian government came over and acquired a one-room schoolhouse here in South Dakota, took it apart, took it to Norway, and then reassembled it.
Yeah, it was that school because it was Norwegian.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? None on chat. I don't see anything on chat. So with that, then, thank you for your time and your patience for being here.
So I'll make an announcement on next month's meeting. If you see the artwork around on the walls, it's from the press's new book, Charlie Russell and the Gnomes of Bullhead Lodge. It'll be Thursday, June 10th, 7 p.m. We'll do a mixture of in-person and Zoom, and our guest speaker will be the book's author, but she'll focus on Charlie Russell, the great Western artist, and his work.
Okay, Dorinda just announced the next books club is going to be on Charlie Russell and the Gnomes. I can't remember the title. And the speaker is going to come and talk about largely Charles Russell and his impact on art on the West. What day did you say?
Thursday, June 10th.
Thursday, June 10th. It'll be both in person and on Zoom at 7 p.m.
And she'll be via Zoom.
And she will be via Zoom.
Charlie Russell.
Okay.
I'll never forget.
Anything else? I'm sorry, I should ask you. Dorinda. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, yeah.